I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on getting Johnny 5 set up and running, as I have a whole course dedicated to getting started with the Johnny 5 framework, but I will quickly walk you through the setup needed to be able to use Johnny 5 to control the tank. First, you will need to get a project directory set up, which I've already done in previous courses, so I will just load up PowerShell here, and then navigate to ddemosj5. Once your directory has been created, you will need to install the Johnny 5 framework using npm, which is done by running npm install Johnny 5. Now, Johnny 5 actually runs on a host machine, which is your computer in this case, and not directly on the Arduino itself, so in order for Johnny 5 to communicate with the Arduino, you will need to load the standard Fermata sketch onto your Arduino in order for the demos to work. You can easily do this by loading up the Arduino IDE, hitting up the File menu, going to Examples, Fermata, and then selecting the standard Fermata Plus sketch. Once that's loaded, verify that the IDE has correctly identified your board and COM port by accessing the Tools menu, and then checking that the selected board and port match your setup. Once you've connected your Arduino to your machine, go ahead and upload the sketch to your board. I know I sort of zipped through the setup here, but again, I have a whole course dedicated to getting started with the Johnny 5 framework using an Arduino and a Raspberry Pi, so if you want more information on all of this, I encourage you to sign up for that course. That's all of the configuration we need to do for now, so go ahead and load up your project folder in your code editor or IDE of choice. I will be using Atom, but that's certainly not a requirement by any means. Use whichever one you want. I won't judge, just don't use Notepad. I might judge you then. Once your editor is loaded, go ahead and create a new JavaScript file and give it whatever meaningful name you would like. I'm just going to call mine Arduino_tank, because that's nice and boring. And now the first step is to pull in the Johnny 5 framework, so at the top I'll add var5 equals require Johnny 5. Next, I need to instantiate a new board object, which corresponds to the actual Arduino, and I do that by assigning new5.board to a variable called board. The board constructor should detect the port on which your Arduino is running automatically, but in the event that it doesn't, you can specify the port by passing in an object literal to the constructor like so. Now the COM port number for you may not be 3, so just make sure it corresponds to the port you selected in the Arduino IDE just a bit ago. Now I need to add an event handler for the board's ready event that will be executed when Johnny 5 has successfully connected to the Arduino and initialized everything it needs to initialize behind the scenes. This handler will contain the code for actually controlling the tank. The last thing I need to do to set the stage for the upcoming lessons is to pull in the appropriate motor shield configuration and construct 2 motor objects, one for each of the motors on the tank chassis. Johnny 5 is all about making things simple, and this certainly holds true for getting motors set up as well. If you navigate to the documentation on the Johnny 5 website for the motor API, you can get an idea as to how to construct a motor object. But what I really want you to focus on here is the prepackaged shield config section, as this is what I will be using for the tank. You can see that Johnny 5 is chock full of a number of configurations for various motor shields, some of which aren't even listed on the site here. Since I am using an Arduino motor shield revision 3, I'm going to just snag the first block of code here, and then paste it into the code for my tank. I'm actually going to move the 2 lines for constructing motor objects inside the board's ready event handler, as I will get an error if these objects are constructed before the board is actually ready. Now, if you're curious as to what the A and B properties stand for, they actually correspond to the terminals on your motor shield to which the physical motors are wired. And I'll just pull up my camera here to show you what I'm talking about on my actual tank. You can see here that my right side motor is wired up to terminal A, and my left side motor is wired up to terminal B. Since motor A and motor B don't tell me which motor each object actually represents, I'm going to change these to names that are a little more meaningful to me. One other change I'm going to make, and this really doesn't have any impact on the demos in this particular course, but can be beneficial for other use cases, is that I'm going to pull in version 3 of the motor shield configuration instead of version 1 that the website listed. The website doesn't actually list this particular configuration version, as far as I could tell anyway, and I actually found it when I was looking through the source for the motor object, trying to figure out how these configuration objects were actually being implemented. You can get to the source by going to the Node Modules folder, Johnny 5, lib, and then opening up the motor.js file here. To quickly find the configs, you can just search for Motor Shield. And you can see here that for the Arduino Motor Shield, there are actually 3 different configurations to find, with each one building on the previous version. Now these configurations correspond to particular versions of the physical motor shield, so you need to choose the configuration that corresponds to your actual shield. So if you have a shield that doesn't support braking or current sensing, then you'll just want to use the first configuration, just like the website listed. And of course, if you're not using an Arduino motor shield, you can browse through here, or the documentation on the website, to find the configuration that matches your setup. You may have to roll your own configuration though, if there isn't one predefined, and you can use these as guides or even check out the documentation on the Motor API to see how to do that. Well, that's all of the foundational Johnny 5 code we'll need, so the next step is to bring in the controller module to be able to drive this thing with an Xbox 360 controller.